Hi everyone, I just wanted to hop on here today to talk about my new book, Listen to My Noise, The Guitar Stylings of George Riley Puckett, and a bit about the man himself. First, here's the book's description from ruralguitar.com. Listen to My Noise, The Guitar Stylings of George Riley Puckett explores the idiosyncratic and highly influential instrumental techniques of an overlooked giant of American music through a collection of 47 detailed transcriptions. Investigating Puckett's approaches in various ensemble formats, the reader is introduced to his signature rhythms and bass runs alongside their variations within vocal and instrumental song formats. This collection also features an introductory biography, never-before-seen photographs, as well as a fundamental insight into the musician's technique, which opens new doors for researchers and players alike. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Riley Puckett was a well-known blind hillbilly guitarist and crooner originally from Alpharetta, Georgia, who settled and made his name in Atlanta. He grew up poor and lost his eyesight at just 3 months old due to improper medical treatment. At the age of 12, he taught himself to play the banjo, which was actually his native instrument, and picked up the guitar shortly thereafter. He received some formal education on the piano while attending the Georgia Academy for the Blind, the same school where bluesman Blind Willie McTell studied. At one point later in his life, he achieved such massive success that he owned half a dozen Model T cars and a few houses. He refused medical treatment for an ingrown hair, a carbuncle, on the back of his neck, and promptly died from blood poisoning in 1946. On a less formal note, I always find it interesting and a bit baffling how people talk about and think about Riley in the present moment. And my research most recently has concerned how his disability impacted his ability to endure as a name throughout the generations. But it's important to understand that when comparing him to other giants of his time, like Jimmy Rogers or Vernon Dalhart or Fiddle and John Carson, he was second only to Fiddle and John in terms of sheer records recorded, having recorded over 200 sides by the time he died. And he was second only to Vernon Dalhart in his day for sheer records sold. So yeah, these are important figures to consider when thinking about Riley in his day. In his heyday, Puckett was a bona fide star, often billed as the sensation of the South. His popularity was so immense that Columbia Records talent scout Frank Walker turned down a young Jimmy Rogers because they, quote, already had Riley Puckett. Though Rogers is widely credited as being the first to yodel within the country idiom, it's important to note that Riley's recording of Rock All Our Babies to Sleep in 1924 predates this by about 3 years. This song is also Puckett's only original song. Beyond just his fame, I argue that he set the mold for the virtuosity we hear in modern bluegrass guitar. His rambunctious, improvised bass runs with the skill lickers foreshadowed the guitar's development as a melodic solo instrument. You'll also hear a really early version of the famed bluegrass G-lick in Riley's guitar playing. Though I dive deeper into all of this in a forthcoming publication in an academic journal, one of the most important things to consider when understanding Riley's sound is that it was a product of the incredibly diverse musical environment of 1920s Atlanta. Unlike the Nashville scene in the 20s, which was geared toward producing a stylized white country music, Atlanta was a hub where black and white traditions were recorded simultaneously from a shared gene pool. For example, a number of white session musicians would play on black sessions and vice versa. It also goes without saying that some of the most well-known and seminal white performers in the country music idiom learned or were influenced or worked directly with black musicians such as A.P. Carter, Mother Maybelle Carter, Woody Guthrie, Bill Monroe, the list goes on. We definitely know this is true of country music at large, and oftentimes when people talk about it, it's in a very general way. However, if you zoom in on one of your favorite white musicians from this era, more often than not, they worked with or were mentored by a black musician in their community. In fact, there's sort of a side story told by a local musician who was sort of a Riley Puckett impersonator that he once led around Riley Puckett and Furry Lewis along the streets of Atlanta. You can hear these black traditions most clearly in his rendition of John Henry. In the recording's intro, Riley even mentions learning the song from a black man on Decatur Street. This specific track is also a rarity in his catalog because it's the only one where he uses bottleneck slide and an alternating thumb bass pattern, hallmarks of the country blues being recorded in Atlanta at the time. His vocal style was also quite eclectic, blending folk traditions with ragtime and blues through a distinctly operatic delivery. I began by transcribing his guitar playing during the pandemic. Cooped up in a small apartment in downtown Houston, with its humming and drumming not unlike Atlanta, I transcribed for hours on end. I came away from that first year with about 150 transcriptions. Fast forward, I'm living in Los Angeles. Fast forward past that, I'm living in Nashville. Riley is always on my mind, on the bandstand, in the recording studio, and at the laptop, writing zany entries for similarly inclined guitar freaks. Sitting in a small Nashville room in December 2023, the HVAC broken and wrapped in blankets, I started researching for the bio that is now the beginning of my book. Regarding his actual playing technique, I assumed for years that he used a thumb and index finger style similar to Mother Maybelle Carter or Dick Justice. That theory began to fall apart when I came across a 1976 article by Norm Cohen, which quoted a number of notable musicians talking about his unique playing style. Interestingly, there were a number of different answers, oftentimes conflicting with one another. Bill Bollock of the Blue Sky Boys suggested he played left-handed but with the guitar strung normally, his bass runs played by his index and middle fingers picking upwards. Lowe Stokes suggested he played with a thumb and finger picks. Riley's other bandmates, Clayton McMitchen and Burt Lane, along with Lewis Willis, Fred Stanley, Slim Bryant, and Guy Blakeman, all said that he played everything with a single finger pick on his index finger. One more twist. Bryant and Blakeman suggest that he used a different tuning as well.
Riley Puckett playing looks to be a triple O.
Riley Puckett run his big E up to play.
Yeah?
His big E up, so he was learning. He played 5-string bands at first.
I see. Run up the G then?
He run it up to G.
Yeah.
And Bubby, when he reached and got that, he used a steel pick on his front finger to make all them fast runs at that one finger. Boom, 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 boom. Just that fast with that one finger. And he did his bass runs with that and strum it upward for his rhythm, like just boom, shh. And I mean, it's crazy, but he done it. He was a character, I'm telling you, and one of the best old guys. He can tell you, had the greatest sense of humor.
All right, so much for that. You say, was my style different from Puckett's? Yeah, Puckett tuned his guitar different from anybody else. He tuned his big E string, the last string, up to G. And this is why you get that real resonant sound, boom, like that. His last string was tuned to G. And I always thought that'd be hard on the bridge on his Martin guitar. Well, excuse me just a minute, the bell just rang. So we were talking about Riley Puckett, and he had an odd style of playing. He didn't use his thumb or a pick, straight pick. He wore one steel pick on the first finger of his right hand, and he picked with that one finger and that one pick. And his E string tuned up to G. Nice fella. If Riley were living today, he'd be rich, because he had a very, very impressive, nice voice. People loved him. He was a blind man, of course.
With this information, it's important to understand that both of these musicians played very closely with Puckett and were quite musically literate, especially Hoyt Slim Bryant, who studied under jazz innovator Perry Bechtel and went on to be a prolific songwriter and session player, namely with Jimmy Rogers on his Camden, New Jersey sessions. As crazy as it may sound, listening back to Riley's size with the notion that he tuned his low E up to G, you'll never hear a low E note in his recordings. This also answers a question I frequently asked myself but dismissed when listening to his playing. In the key of C, I often got the sense that I heard a G bass note ringing past its original use, bleeding into other chords. I can never figure out how or why, though the theory of a raised bass is about the only logical answer to this. Yet another aspect that the raised bass hypothesis comments on is the fact that when Riley is making a G chord in pictures, he doesn't seem to be fretting the third fret of the low E, though there is a photo of him playing an old Washburn guitar with a single index pick, no thumb pick, fretting a G chord without the low root. As for the single index hypothesis, that one is harder to prove, but listening back to his playing, I am not able to find any instances of him playing counterpoint on two non-adjacent strings. save for his previously discussed John Henry, which uses an alternating bass technique. With all this in mind, I invite you to come to your own conclusions. It's important to remember that his version of John Henry and his banjo sides, Sourwood Mountain and Cumberland Gap, suggest that he did use his thumb, but I make the case that this is an anomaly across his catalog. Signing off, I want to thank John Fabke of the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum for writing the metadata for these 2 interviews. Without him, I wouldn't have known that Riley was even mentioned in them. I also want to thank Riley's grandson, Dave Pounds, for his assistance throughout the research process and for providing never-before-seen photos of Riley and his family. Furthermore, I'm indebted to the folks at the following institutions for their support: the Center for Popular Music, Middle Tennessee State University, the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum, and the Grand Ole Opry. Without Matthew Battella's creative vision, the designer behind this book, I would have been dead in the water too. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you got a little bit out of the video. If you're ready to dive into these transcriptions yourself, head over to ruralguitar.com for the book, exclusive merge, and lesson materials. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the roots of American guitar.